Welcome to this explainer. So, what actually happens when a state decides to tackle substance use disorder not just as a massive public health crisis, but as a core piece of public safety? Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly deeply impactful strategy happening right now inside West Virginia's justice system. Substance use disorder is one of the most common and, frankly, most disruptive health issues affecting people in custody today. But by utilizing a structured, long-term approach, West Virginia is actively working to bridge that gap between incarceration and recovery. By the end of this explainer, you're going to see exactly how treating addiction behind bars works and why the state is investing so heavily in this dual priority model.
Here's our blueprint for today's explainer. First, health meets public safety. Then we'll go inside the RSAT model. After that, prisons versus regional jails. And finally, custody to community care. Let's just jump right in, shall we?
Section 1. Health meets public safety.
To really get the philosophy driving these state-level decisions, we've got to zoom out and look at the macro view. West Virginia essentially views treating addiction during incarceration not as some sort of favor, but as a fundamental pillar of keeping the public safe. And to see how this builds, let's look at the timeline. Because this isn't some brand new experimental pilot program, no. Back in 2016, the state launched its first inpatient treatment program specifically inside a regional jail, which actually was an expansion of a prison model they already had. Fast forward to April 2025, and the governor announces a whole new wave of grant funding specifically for this initiative. So today, we're looking at an ongoing facility-based treatment expansion. The big takeaway here is that this is absolutely not a one-and-done initiative or a temporary talking point. The state is actively pouring funds into these services year after year.
In fact, the West Virginia governor's 2025 grant announcement put the state's messaging incredibly bluntly. The goal is to, quote, end the cycle of drug abuse and crime. The policy framework here makes a really pragmatic link between those two things. Basically, people leaving jail or prison with untreated substance use disorder face a dramatically high risk of relapse. And that relapse directly increases the chances of a fatal overdose, new criminal charges, or ending up without stable housing. By treating the addiction during incarceration, the state is trying to cut off that cycle right at the root, long before the person even walks out the door. So treatment is viewed as an active ingredient of public safety, not some separate side project.
Moving on to Section 2, inside the RSAT model. Let's look behind the walls. So we've looked at the broad state policy from a 30,000-foot view, but what actually happens behind those walls inside these highly specialized units? Well, it centers around RSAT, which stands for Residential Substance Abuse Treatment. According to the Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation, these are definitely not quick detox layovers. Not at all. These are long-term, super-intensive residential treatment units designed specifically for inmates with severe histories of drug or alcohol addiction. We are talking about high-level needs here, with placements running 6 to 9 months, and honestly, sometimes up to a full year. Think about that for a second. That is a massive, massive commitment of time and resources for both the facility and the individual.
But how do they actually spend those 6 to 12 months? The answer is through what's called a therapeutic community. Listen, this isn't just taking a counseling class once a week and then heading back to a standard cell block. It is a highly structured, completely immersive daily practice. First up, they focus heavily on establishing healthy routines. Second, they enforce strict individual accountability. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, they rely on peer support from other people going through the exact same recovery process. It's that shared experience, right? And fourth, they actively prep for re-entry into society. So it's an environment completely dedicated to addressing problematic attitudes and actively practicing behavior change every single day.
Now you might be wondering, why rely on this specific, highly intensive model? Well, according to a Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation policy directive, national research shows that effective therapeutic community programs can reduce recidivism by 20 to 30%. Now, just to be completely clear here, that figure is a structural, evidence-based goal driving the state's policy. It's not some magic guarantee for every single participant. But still, a potential 20 to 30% drop in reoffending, that is exactly why this specific therapeutic model remains the absolute beating heart of West Virginia's correctional treatment strategy.
All right, Section 3, prisons versus regional jails.
Okay, so we know what the treatment is and why it's done. But where exactly is this happening within West Virginia's logistical blueprint? The state system actually includes both state prisons and regional jails, and understanding the difference between the two is really key here. Remember that 2016 timeline milestone we talked about earlier, when the state launched an inpatient program for men at the Southwestern Regional Jail? Why did that matter so much? because a lot of people in custody move through regional jails before or even during their state prison sentences. By putting RSAT units right inside regional jails, the state gets this critical early intervention. It helps them catch and stabilize people way earlier in their journey through the system, long before they are transferred or released. Meanwhile, placing them in state prisons allows for the expansion of those existing long-term, highly intensive treatment models.
Over 510. That number right there is the sheer scale of the state's investment right now. According to the state's annual report for fiscal year 2025, the system includes over 510 treatment beds specifically tied to this residential substance abuse treatment program across its facilities. That is a massive footprint, guys. It proves that this isn't just some nice idea living on a piece of paper. It is a heavily resourced reality taking up physical space all over the state.
And when I say all over the state, I mean it. The 2025 grant announcement detailed funding to support RSAT services at a whole bunch of specific locations. We're talking Beckley, which interestingly enough includes a unit right on the grounds of Jackie Withrow Hospital, plus Charleston, Denmar, Huttonsville, Lacken, Parkersburg, Pruntytown, Salem, St. Mary's, plus units at the regional jails. Seeing all these names really reinforces the fact that West Virginia is not relying heavily on outside referrals or short-term programming the way some other states do. They're operating and maintaining their own dedicated, widespread network of facility-based treatment centers. It's the whole shebang.
Which brings us to Section 4, Custody to Community Care.
So what happens when those 6 to 12 intensive months in the therapeutic community are finally up and the individual actually returns to society? Well, the essential truth of this entire system boils down to this. Correctional treatment works best when it's connected to community care after release. Think about it. You literally cannot just treat an individual in a vacuum, release them back into the exact same environment, and expect perfection without any follow-through. West Virginia's broader public health messaging really emphasizes this connection. RSAT is specifically designed to coordinate with the state's broader recovery services. For instance, the state's Department of Human Services has highlighted things like quick response teams and other community-based recovery services to essentially catch these individuals the moment they get out. The goal is to make that handoff from custody to community as seamless as humanly possible.
Now, as enthusiastic as we are about the structured learning here, we also have to look at this impartially and weigh the goal against the reality. The overarching goal is undeniably ambitious, right? Supporting recovery, reducing recidivism, and drastically improving re-entry outcomes for the public good. But the reality of the system is that it does have capacity limits. Just because the state has 510+ beds doesn't mean every single person who needs help can immediately access it the exact day they ask. Outcomes are naturally going to vary based on the specific facility, staffing levels, the length of the stay, and that post-release support we just talked about. The state explicitly frames RSAT as a structured intervention for individuals with significant need. And practically speaking, that means they have to prioritize the most severe cases rather than offering immediate universal access to everybody right out of the gate.
So it leaves us with a pretty crucial question to ponder. If treatment behind bars actively changes what happens after release, lowering overdose risks, improving stability, breaking the cycle of crime, how does that redefine the very purpose of a prison sentence? West Virginia's RSAT model really forces us to consider that incarceration might not just be about doing time, but about utilizing that time to fundamentally rewire an individual's future for the safety of the entire community. It is a complex, continuing, and deeply important piece of the state's recovery infrastructure. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.